This is my 17th video on my attempts to construct a small OO gauge layout. See part 1 for my reasons for doing this, and my lengthy series on my N-gauge railway modelling for more interesting stuff with trains actually running, etc. This part is another kit build, but something a little different. The Farm Cottage Scene CK10 from the Wills Craftsman Series. I had eyed these Wills Craftsman kits for a while, but I never tried one as I couldn't quite see the point of them. It seemed from the descriptions offered that mostly you had to make a lot of the parts yourself, being supplied just with sheet and strip castings and with some detail parts. I might have seen some rationale for this if these kits were very cheap, but they're not. They're actually on the expensive side. This particular kit cost me more than any other building kit that I've used recently, other than the extremely fine Metcalfe church kit, for which I paid $1 more than I did for this Wills kit, $30 versus $29. I could have bought 2 super quick kits for what I paid for this kit. Well, spoiler alert, after building this kit, I feel that my initial doubts were entirely justified. I can't quite see what the target market is. Not skinflints, as the kits aren't cheap. I have to say that my general feeling whilst working on this kit was that the only reasonable target market was masochists, people who felt a deep need to go through a lot of suffering as part of their scenic creation. I suppose building a kit like this could be seen as a step towards scratch building. Myself, I can't see doing it more than once. If I want to do this kind of thing, I'll just scratch build. If I want to build from a kit, I'll stick with kits that actually seem to be trying to help me make a good building rather than trying to make things difficult. Anyway, enough preamble, probably too much. On to the actual build, which hopefully will be somewhat interesting, if only in the sense of the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Here's the way the kit comes, inside a box made of transparent plastic with a folded sheet round the parts showing an illustration of how the completed scene might look. The kit does contain materials to create everything seen in this picture except for the vegetation, ground cover and miscellaneous timber and stuff in and around the buildings. Here's a clearer version of that cover illustration. This illustration can serve as a useful supplement to the instructions in indicating what you might aim for in the construction. Here's what you get when you unpack the kit. Flat, textured plastic sheets from which you are expected to cut walls, roof and paving, various cast strips which can be cut to form other parts, various plastic detail parts, a booklet discussing in general various techniques for working with plastics, cutting, finishing, etc. A sheet of instructions illustrating and briefly describing the construction process. A sheet of templates indicating the shape to cut, walls, etc. from the plastic sheets. And a sheet of black and white scale drawings of the intended cottage building. I started by cutting the roofing parts, as it seemed that these would be by far the simplest. The shapes themselves were fairly simple, without any interior holes, and the slate sheeting provided for the roofing was much less coarsely textured than the stone sheeting for the walls, and so was easier to cut. Here you can see my first attempt, with the paper template on the left and the resulting part cut from the slate sheet on the right. The plastic used is of a fairly soft, slightly soapy texture, which helps in cutting and smoothing it. Here you can see the rest of the roof parts. Although the templates are shown on the front of the parts here, they are actually used on the back of the sheet, which is smooth to guide the cutting out. You could take various approaches to using the paper templates to cut parts from the plastic sheets. I just went with drawing round the templates with a fine black marker. This is the shape for the front wall of the cottage, drawn on a sheet of the stone here. The booklet on techniques discusses various ways for cutting the plastic sheets, including using a drill and using a jigsaw. I found that I was able to cut the sheets using a strong craft knife with several passes, and I felt that this probably offered greater precision with less mess than using a saw. I couldn't find any clarification as to what the double chevron marks on the templates were supposed to mean. I assumed from context that the meaning was that the parts should be beveled on those edges and perhaps that extra material should be left. I don't really know quite. Anyway, I worked my way through, cutting out the various roof and wall parts and tidying up the edges. The stone sheeting was much trickier to cut than the slate, since the stone texture was deep and so the sheets were thicker in parts and very uneven in thickness. These little parts are for the chimney. I didn't actually use the templates to cut these, but just cut them to the dimensions of the templates. And here is the very rough structure of the cottage assembled from the cut-out walls. I believe I was on my second day working on this kit by the time I got to this point. As you can see, little white plastic pieces are provided to help join the corners. These help to secure the corners and to keep them square. I did try to bevel the ends of the walls where they join at the corners, but I guess I could have done a better job. Here's the chimney assembled from those little rectangular pieces and with two of the plastic corner pieces glued into it to help with attaching it to the top of the wall, as suggested by the instructions, not my idea. And here is the chimney attached to the top of the end wall. Even with the white plastic attaching pieces, I somehow couldn't manage to get it to sit quite straight. At this point, I tried the roof on to see how it might fit. I didn't really quite understand how the designers of the kit intended the roof to fit. It also seemed to me that the roof was too short. It would have fitted much better over the building if it had been 2 or 3 millimeters longer. But I just cut the parts based on the templates supplied. Perhaps if I'd beveled the walls more aggressively, that would have made the building smaller, and so the roof would have fitted better. At this point, I glued the 3 sections of the roof together. I did it this way because I wanted to paint and weather the roof and the walls separately before assembling them to each other. I believe I somewhat misunderstood how these roof parts were supposed to go together, as when I came to deal with the strips provided with the kit for ridge tiling, it seemed that they were supposed to go onto a flat surface rather than onto an angled peak. So somehow the roof parts were supposed to go together with flat corners. I don't quite see how. Here's one of the sprues provided with strips and also some detailing parts. 2 of these sprues come with the kit. I wasn't entirely clear which strips were intended for what purpose. At this point I was looking for strips to use for sills and lintels. I ended up using the 2 thin flat strips at the far left for sills and the wider flat strip at the right, to which some of the detail parts are joined, for the lintels. You need to cut the sills and lintels from the strip you've chosen to the appropriate lengths. The colour cover illustration and the black and white scale drawing give some indication as to how the sills and lintels might go. I wanted to get these on at this point, as they should be blended in with the walls during the painting and weathering process. Or at least that was my idea. The doors were actually provided as detailed parts, so I didn't have to cut those out myself. I painted the doors at this point, but I didn't fit them until later. Here's the front of the cottage building with the sills and lintels in place. I didn't put a lintel on the main door, as there's a porch to go over this, and I felt that having a lintel there would just make it difficult to attach the porch. Ever economical, the instructions just say that you should cut glazing for the windows from the transparent plastic packaging of the kit. Not much more is provided in the way of guidance or suggestion. I cut pieces from the packaging and attached them to all of the window detail parts, leaving the parts on the sprue whilst I did this. I glued the glazing to the styrene window parts using liquid polycement, as I found before that this worked okay. Though of course you have to be very careful to use only a little glue so as not to smudge the visible surfaces of the windows. Here's my sprue of window parts held up to the light to show the glazing. The parts on the end are for the porch to go over the front door. Now I wanted to do some painting and weathering. First I painted over all of the stone parts, including the sills and lintels, with polyscale acrylic D&H grey, which is a light, slightly brownish grey. Next I weathered with washes, using a lot of mineral spirits and small amounts of black and brown enamel paint. I put quite a lot of brown onto the stonework, but only black onto the slate of the roof. Next I wanted to put curtains onto the windows. The kit didn't really offer much regarding this, though the cover illustration does include curtains. I'd printed a bunch of these curtains on my PC printer when assembling previous card kits, and I used some of those to provide curtains for the windows here. So at this point I had the walls and the roof basically painted, the windows glazed and curtained, and the doors painted. Now I glued the windows and doors in place from the inside of the building. I had glued the curtains directly onto the window parts rather than trying to space them back. Here's the view from the front with the windows and door in place. At this point I looked back at these strip and detail parts, trying to decide what was what. It appeared that the rounded and peaked strips seen here are intended to make roof ridge tiles, but as previously mentioned, the backs of these strips are flat and about 3/16 of an inch wide, so how are they supposed to fit onto the peaks of the roof? I looked back at the cover illustration. They seem to have a peaked strip on the top of the roof and rounded strips down the angles, but honestly, even in this picture they look a bit weird, and the only way to get them to go on anything like this would be to somehow make flat surfaces at the roof joins. I gave up on that idea and just used some Metcalfe paper ridge tile strips. I had lots of these around, as Metcalfe give you a sheet of these with each kit and you generally use less than a quarter of the sheet. It was a bit awkward trying to get these to look at all sensible at the join of the roof edges, and I did weather them a bit to make them blend in better with the rest of the building. I had a heck of a time getting the roof to go on at all straight, as it seemed too short for the building. It has to go up against the chimney at one end, so there's no room for fudging there. I filed down the top of the wall at the far end in an attempt to get the roof to sit down better, but I never did get it entirely straight. The chimney pots come on the sheet with the strips. The parts supplied are for halves, and you have to glue them together in pairs to make the chimney pots. Two types of chimney tops are provided on the sprue, but only the square ones will fit onto the chimney as made from the templates, and these require 4 pots, although the illustrations show only 2 pots on the chimney. There are enough parts to make 4 pots, and you can see the 4 pots I made up at right here. The instructions say to cut barge boards from strips. I assumed that the strip intended was the wider flat strip with 2 thicknesses, and you can see here I've cut a barge board for one side of the roof by the chimney. Barge boards are kind of necessary to hide the gaps beside the chimney, which are an inevitable consequence of cutting the parts the shape given with a template. So now I've fitted 2 barge boards and a chimney top and have weathered them. Then I turn to guttering. Strips for this are provided as shown up front here. The actual gutter runs along one side of the strip and the rest of the strip is flat. Because of differences in the width of the roof overhang, I found that I had to cut down the flat part of the guttering strips by different amounts for each side. Of course, we don't want the guttering to be red, so I painted it all black, which was a fiddly job. At this point I also fitted the chimney pots and blackened their tops. The illustrations show some convoluted forming of the downspouts. All that is provided are straight strips for pipes and little parts for gathering funnels. To achieve what is shown in the illustrations, you'd have to somehow form 3-dimensional S-bends from the piping, I suppose by heating it, though I'm highly dubious as to how that would work. I didn't try. I just stuck with straight down pipes. I glued the funnel parts to the end of the strips and then cut the strips to length to fit onto the walls underneath the guttering. I painted those downspout assemblies black before attaching them. At this point I also assembled and painted the porch to go over the front door. Strips are provided for yard walls, and these need to be glued back to back in pairs in order to have walling with stone texture on both sides. At this point I've also painted one of the 2 gates supplied. Also I have started to assemble the outbuildings, which are provided as more conventional kits where you just need to attach the parts together without needing to cut them to shape yourself. The main walls for the two stone outbuildings are seen assembled here. The white paper's there because I was painting black the two circular parts. I'm not really quite clear what these little circles are supposed to be. They're shown attached to the exterior walls of the cottage in the illustrations, though differently. The cover illustration shows a circle on the front wall, whilst the black and white illustrations show a circle going on the end wall. My theory was that at some point the walls of the cottage were threatening to fall down, so a metal bracing rod was put in with these circles on the end of it. I'm not sure if this is at all what was actually intended. If you have some better idea why there should be black circular parts on the exterior walls of a cottage, please let me know in the comments below. Anyway, here you can see those black painted circular parts, and also parts for the outhouse and for roofs and walls of the other outbuildings. So the outhouse walls go together round the interior part defining the seat, and then the seat with its hole goes in place. The door is at right. I ended up leaving this part way open as it seemed pointless having interior detail and then having the door closed so none of it could be seen. Here you can see that I've attached the porch over the front door and also attached a downspout and one of the circles. I attached the other circle at the back opposite the first one, according to my theory that they represent the ends of a bracing rod. The rear downspout has also been attached here. Here's a view of the rear without flash, generally a much better indicator of normal appearance. And here's the front without flash. I spray painted the wooden sections of the outbuilding walls and roofs etc. brown and parts that looked like corrugated metal silver. This outbuilding, some kind of storage shed, gets a wooden divider. The other shed gets a wooden front. I scraped paint from round the edge of the roof so that the polycement could glue it. Now all of the outbuildings have their roofs and doors in place. This is the figure that comes with the kit. I've no idea what the little rectangular thing with a tab on it is supposed to be. Please let me know if you have some idea. The illustration in the instructions shows the corners of the yard walling being joined using a square part. But the actual corner parts supplied are not square, they're half square cut on the diagonal. I've no idea why. It would have made much more sense to make them square as shown in the illustration. I cut a piece from one of the white corner joiners to help make a corner for the yard wall, and then glued the triangular section corner piece over that. The illustrations all just show the wall sort of going out of shot. I wanted to make a wall that would actually enclose a yard and connect back to the cottage. I made the yard wall in two sections, basically because the gate was too weak to safely hold wall sections together. On the left is an L coming out from the cottage and connected to the gate. Then there is a piece with three sides that goes from the other side of the gate round to the back of the cottage side wall. Brown stripping is provided for capping the yard walls, and I've done my best to cut this to length and to join it at the corners. The kit actually only provides two corner pieces for the yard wall, so I had to sort of fudge the back right corner. Here are all of the finished parts at this point. This is not how I actually ended up arranging the outbuildings. A sheet of paving is provided. The instructions are pretty vague as to what you might use this for. I cut from it a path to go from the back door round the side of the cottage and out to the road at the front. At this point I went back to weathering, putting a black wash on the outbuildings, the yard walls and the path. And I did my best to paint the figure. Pretty tough to get much detail on an 00 gauge figure, at least it is with my limited hand-eye coordination. I still don't know what that other thing with the figure is supposed to be. I glued the weathered path into place round the back and side of the cottage. And here are all of the parts pretty much as I saw them going together. I drilled a small hole in the bottom of one leg of the figure and glued in a piece of piano wire with superglue in order to be able to get the figure to stand up on the layout. And here is everything tentatively placed on the layout. Not really enough light at this point to take a proper shot without flash. So for now it will have to be flash. I'm not displeased with how this turned out, although there are some issues. The roof is slightly crooked and the ridge tiling could be better, for example. It was a heck of a lot of work though, much more than most kit builds. As noted at the start, I really wouldn't buy another of these Wills Craftsman kits. If I want to build from a kit, I'll stick with kits that actually provide the parts. If I want to go the other way and scratch build, well, window parts and textured builder sheets would definitely be helpful, but I'd just buy those and do my own design if I decided to go that way. At least then I'd be clear what I was aiming for, and if the measurements didn't match up, it would be entirely my own fault. So, a fairly nice cottage on the layout, but not a kit experience I intend to repeat.